So let's talk about this film. For anyone who somehow missed it, 21 Pilots released a film in IMAX last week into the weekend. It had a very short run. I don't think they expected it to perform as well as it did in the box office, and I think if they had known that, they might have given it more of an extended release, but at the same time, I'm not shocked it didn't get a super extended release. In my theater, it wasn't that rowdy. It might have been because I was at a later showing, on a Saturday. It wasn't one of the opening nights or anything like that. Things were a lot calmer. There were some people singing along, but it was mostly kind of quietly to themselves, humming along. No one was like full lung blaring. I personally appreciated that. In an ideal world, there would have been different showings listed somehow, where it's like, this is the one where everyone's going to go and sing along. This is the one if you want to just sit quietly and watch it. I wanted to go in and experience the sound and the mix of the film myself without, hearing other people singing along around me. But I also perfectly understand people who want to go in and have that sort of atmosphere of everyone singing along to these songs. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I was just kind of grateful that the showing I went to didn't have a ton of that. This was a fantastic film. I thought it was very well put together. I went into it expecting that there were only going to be one, maybe two portions of documentary footage. For some reason, I misunderstood or misheard something that said there was a segment in the middle kind of splitting the film in half where they showed the documentary footage, and then it was just concert bookending that. But it kind of opened with a little bit of documentary stuff, went into concert, then more documentary when they got to the B stage. They did the B stage all the way to the encore, more documentary stuff, and then they closed out the film. And just leaving the concert stuff aside for now, just talking about the documentary, it did a couple of really good things. It helped to highlight various aspects of the tour production that I think some of us kind of already had some inkling of from other behind-the-scenes tour diary things, but not necessarily as fully a kind of understanding or having this close of a look into what went into putting on a show like this, especially when you're on a tour going into a different country and kind of working with them there. Like they said this, I think, a number of times, that in a lot of ways they just kind of had to work with what they had there, as opposed to, having the normal prep time that they normally have when they're locally in America, being able to jump from venue to venue that aren't actually that far apart. That was really cool to see. Also just getting Tyler and Josh's perspectives on, what it was like to be on a tour like this, to put on a show like this, to be away from their families. So yeah, I thought that was all really well put together. The moment discussing how to pull off the car radio stunt was fun. That was well put together. And obviously the end credit scene was really good. I thought it also did a good job of highlighting Josh's, shedding more light on Josh and his perspective and all of this. Because certainly Tyler spent a lot more time talking than Josh did, as is per usual, right? But they did have a segment, at least one segment there, where they kind of just followed Josh and focused on him and his, warm up and his routine, and just sort of letting, and not necessarily forcing him to vocalize a lot of things so much as just following him and watching him do his thing. And I thought that was really well done, that, Tyler is able to kind of talk about and talk through things that he's thinking through, but Josh isn't always as eager to do that. I thought they did a good job of highlighting that, and again, looking at some of the other people in the crew and stuff like that. The other thing that I thought was really good was the music underneath it. That music was composed by Roland Bingaman, who did the arrangements for Ned's Cozy Fireplace and the Torchbearer theme and things like that. But yeah, I thought all of that was really well put together. The concert itself, very well shot. Again, I saw the Clancy tour in the pit, so this really helped to kind of highlight or illustrate a lot of the other elements to the show that I might have missed out on, or I did miss out on by being in the pit. Certainly something like the performance of Stressed Out, I didn't really get to experience because the trees circle was being built around us as that song was playing, and we were like being shuffled away so that a path could be cleared for them to walk through, and we had to, keep our distance, and we were just kind of being moved around by security while that song was playing, so I didn't really get to experience that. And then I watched it afterwards on YouTube, but that isn't the same as, being there because it's low quality. So being able to see that at IMAX was really cool, to fully get to experience that. And then certainly also just other details about their performance, getting that close up gives you a different perspective than being in the pit, even with the big TV screens that they have. So I thought that was really cool. Obviously, goes without saying, the navigating Nico and the Niners into Heavy Dirty Soul segment, fantastic. One of the best parts of that set list. worked really well in IMAX. I think there were some songs that worked better than others. Just as a baseline, the entire thing I thought was really well mixed. It sounded great. But there were some that kind of excelled in that format. In particular, I thought The Line and Heathens worked really well in a theater context, which kind of makes sense given that they're both, one's for a film, one's for a show. Overcompensate didn't sound as good. It was still good, don't get me wrong, but there was something about the sound of that song that just didn't quite work as well for me in a theater mix as some of the other ones. But that second segment with Navigating, Nico and the Niners, Heavy Duty Soul, that was really good. And then the Paladin Strait Bandito segment in IMAX on the big screen, that was incredible. The cinematography in that moment was incredible. I don't know who the cameraman was during that segment. I don't think it was Mark. I think it was probably just one of their other cameramen. But he did a really good job. I mean, I'm sure they rehearsed this because I think it's the same feed that's going into the big screens for the audience in the concert. But it was perfectly timed walking around the two singers, right, Josh and Tyler, so that as they circled them and they were sort of, bouncing off and on, Josh starts with I'm a Bandito, I could take the high road, I'm a Bandito. And then Tyler chimes in with I could swim the Paladin Strait, that kind of stuff. It was perfectly timed, so as they circled around, they captured them just as they were starting their respective parts. So that was fantastic. I'm very impressive. And yeah, just that in IMAX, in the IMAX sound mix was incredible. Yeah, everything looked great. The visuals were all fantastic. The moment right leading into Navigating, when Dima is shown, that music is playing and the fire comes on, very well done. The car radio stunt was really cool, having him go on that large building. I did think, and this isn't their fault, it was just seemed to be the venue that they were working with, but they didn't have a trap door for him to jump through like they did at my show and I think most of the other shows. So it was a little less impressive visually. I think it would have been much better to have him fall through the trap door and then appear up on the stage, but it still was done well. And it was, again, very impressive that they were able to pull that off, but I think it would have been cooler to have the trap door there. Again, not a lot you could do about that. The only other issue that I have, not what I just mentioned wasn't even that big of an issue, was I don't think they should have cut Vignette. And the reason for that is not because Vignette is a song I really like, although I do really like it, but because the transition from Holding On To You into Car Radio was really abrupt because they cut that. And it made me worry for a moment that all the transitions from the songs that they cut would be as abrupt, and they didn't end up being as abrupt. I think all the other transitions worked quite well. I kind of knew where they were cutting songs, partly because I had seen the show. I was aware of the set list. You could also kind of tell when there was a bit of a time jump, but that all worked fine. I didn't think there was a huge issue there. Cutting off the end of Holding On To You when they don't finish playing Holding On To You. It goes into Vignette, it starts playing Vignette, and then they just cut it off and went into Car Radio. And I think for an audience who doesn't know what Vignette is, didn't recognize that song, I don't know how many members of the audience in the film auditorium watching the movie didn't know what Vignette was. But for anyone who didn't, I think that kind of might have been less noticeable. But it made me think right off the bat, oh, we're going into Vignette. They're going to play Vignette. And then it cut, and then they were playing Car Radio. And that was a little abrupt, a little harsh. I understand why they cut songs. I understand which songs they cut. The idea behind that, I certainly think a song like The Judge and the way that opens might have dragged a little bit. It wasn't the best or the most visually outstanding compared to some of the other ones that they wanted to keep in. Right? If they couldn't have all the songs on the set list, I understand cutting that one. I understand cutting Backslide or Vignette, except for the fact that transition was just really tough. And I do think the Vignette performance was cool, especially at the end where he got on the synthesizer and stuff like that. That would have been really cool to see, more close up. But I get it. I understand why they cut that, except for that transition being so abrupt. And I don't know what they could have done about it because that transition works really well in the show. It just is hard to cut around. But other than that, yeah, I thought it was fantastic. The second it releases on physical media, if that happens, I'm being a little optimistic here. I understand it's actually quite unlikely that will happen. But if it does, I will definitely be buying it as quickly as possible. Be cool if there are bonus features to something like that as well. I'll be curious to know what that is. It was good. I was really glad to see The Line live because they didn't play that one at my show. So that was cool to see. I thought that was a beautiful performance. And again, I thought that song worked really well in the IMAX soundscape. But with that being said, that was my review of the film. What did you guys think?